In the early 90s, the computer video game scene was going through a revolution. A 3D revolution led by id Software. Wolfenstein and later on Doom were all the buzz. Violent, brutal, and in full 3D, they have brought life to a new genre, first-person shooters. Or at least these will be the two titles that spring to everyone's minds when asked about id. But those were not their first games, especially not first 3D games, since Catacomb 3D and Hovertank 3D were before them. What I'm talking about is something more child-friendly, something more flatter. I'm talking about the adventures of child endangerment in space, also known as Commander Keen. I happened to play this few years after release, and after digging out some history, it turns out this was a big deal. At the time being, computers didn't have hardware-accelerated scrolling and had to redraw each frame, which was a task that required quite a lot of processing power, something PCs back then didn't have. That was until John Carmack, a programmer at Softdisk, discovered a trick called adaptive tile refresh. Carmack and his colleague Tom Hall created a Super Mario 3 clone, replacing Mario with Dangerous Dave. Through Softdisk, they tried to show this proof of concept to Nintendo, but Nintendo declined entering the PC market at the time. The knowledge didn't go to waste though, as it was used to create a slew of Commander Keen games. In this video, we'll be looking at the Invasion of the Vorticons trilogy. Developed in 3 months, it was published by Apogee under their famous shareware model on December 14th of 1990. The game begins with logos, and for the first time we saw the logo that would become a legend. Then it jumps straight to the menu, where you can start or continue your game, or read up on the story since cutscenes were not a thing in the 90s. You're Billy Blaze, 8-year-old genius who built an interstellar spaceship from household items, dubbed the Bean with Bacon Mega Rocket, and he calls himself Commander Keen, Defender of Earth. Short story is, Keen was exploring Mars when aliens called Vorticons stole parts of his ship. Now it's up to you to find them hidden in their Mars fortresses, find out what those evil bastards are planning, and possibly save the Earth. Commander Keen is a simple platformer featuring the first PC smooth scrolling graphics in EGA, which meant a whopping number of 16 colors! Yay! The graphics and animations are basic but work fairly well for this title. You walk around the Mars overworld, select the level to enter, and finishing it allows you to explore more of the Mars surface. You could almost say this is a non-linear open world game. In 1990. Nice foresight, id Software. I said the game is kind of non-linear because it's not required to complete all levels in order to complete the game, basically allowing you to speedrun it. The levels are pretty straightforward, just get to the exit, possibly collect some keycards to open doors and shoot some alien ass while collecting stuff for points, which in turn gives you extra lives. Man, 90s DOS games era was a very simple time with simple goals. Keen controls fairly well, but does have some issues. You control Keen using the arrow keys and he has a bit of weight to him, but quickly gains momentum. You jump using the control key, but when jumping, Keen comes to a full halt, does this little squat and then jumps. It's really awkward, this sort of delayed jump. It doesn't feel like a problem at first, but later on, if you're trying to avoid projectiles or enemies, it's nearly impossible to do that. And really infuriating since you'd have to predict everything you know to know how to early press the button. Keen can also equip a pogo stick to get to higher places by pressing Alt. That is when you find it in episode 1. You can also shoot once you find the gun, but why id Software? Who thought that it's a good idea to map the shooting to pressing both Ctrl and Alt? Buttons that are mapped to jumping, why? If you're gonna panic and try to quickly shoot, you sometimes end up pulling the pogo stick or something. And you had the whole keyboard. That's like what, 100 other keys? But I'll give them credit, they did fix every issue in later games. There's ammo scattered around the levels since your weapon has a limited number of shots. Most of enemies take more than one hit to die, but you can only get hit once. And you restart the whole level. No checkpoints. The problem with enemies is, not all of them kill you, not all of them are killable, and it's never clear from the get-go. And since you die in one hit, you can guess how frustrating it gets. Some enemies just push you around, posing a very little threat as long as you don't let yourself get pushed into a hazard. But other ones, one touch, death. So besides some control issues, you just go through the game accompanied by EGA graphics and the buzzing of the PC speaker. Yeah, this game only had PC speaker sound effects. Music? Hope you liked pure silence. And maybe that's for the better, the PC speaker was not, I repeat, not a good musical device. Collect keys, parts, extra sweets for points and lives, and blast off Mars to episode 2. And holy crap, what is it with the difficulty spikes after the shareware episode? This time around you're on the Vorticon mothership disabling cannons aimed at Earth's landmarks. I like the fact that you can actually accidentally activate them and blow up the planet and the keeners are like, oops. My biggest complaint about this episode is how surprisingly hard it gets compared to the first one. There's a lot of Vorticons who can now shoot back at most of the time, and they're placed in a way that makes them unavoidable. Combine that with the delayed jump and it's impossible to dodge their shots even if you try. There was this one place with a narrow corridor and multiple shooting guys, and I think I've spent like 20 minutes abusing the save state system to just get past that. The levels themselves are filled with more hazards, so you better master the controls or else you're dead. The second episode has a few different mechanics, like using the small creatures to get to new places, light switches and moving platforms, which is really neat. Unfortunately, the third episode doesn't have much. In the third episode, Keen visits Vorticon 6, the home of the, you guessed it, Vorticons, where he will proceed to invade cities in which he will burst into homes and slaughter Vorticon mothers and children alike. No, I'm not kidding. That's actually what happens. Man, and you think the postal dude was violent? You can actually murder kids in school and the teacher while learning the standard galactic alphabet. That is messed up. You're on the hunt for the Grand Intellect, who turns out to be Keen's school rival. Defeat him in the only boss battle of this series and the Vorticons will thank you for freeing them. The Vorticon population that you didn't slaughter, that is. The third episode is littered with enemies to shoot, but honestly felt a lot easier than the second one, but still more challenging than the first. Overall, the game holds up pretty good. It does feel dated, but it's still fun to play, even though some parts can be a little frustrating and the controls are sort of clunky. It basically is the father of all scrolling platformers of that era, and it's really fun to look at what started the platformer craze in the 90s. If you can put your hands on a copy, I suggest to try it out, it works perfectly fine in any version of DOSBox.